Welcome back to Capturing the Intangibles. This episode, Rick and I explore enterprise data potential through the lens of everyday experiences we log into today. Rick also contemplates long game and what kind of data-driven apps will be in the hands of CIOs in 5 years. So, remember to set a reminder for 5 years from now for our 264th episode, where we'll see just how close Rick was in predicting the future. Enjoy. Hey, Rick, how's it going?
Hey, Mike. It's going okay. It's been a rough week when it comes to the sports world for me. So, and we're just moving on. We're moving on. I'm going through the different stages of, what do they call it? The phases of depression and acceptance. I don't know, something like that. I don't know what stage I'm on, but it's not good. It's not good. Should I be doing this podcast today? Probably not, but we're gonna power through it.
This is Georgian grief, right?
Yeah.
This is unique to those that come from Georgia after the election, after the sports. I don't have that same grief that you do coming from Philadelphia.
Well, let's not get into the election side, non-political stance here, but the sports side. Look, I live in Atlanta. That's gonna say enough for everyone. But I've been in a deep, dark space for about a month now. You know, the Braves, the Falcons, now my dogs. That's why I keep this close by at all times. You know, so it's.
By the way, I finally leveled up. I've graduated off of coffee like a normal adult. And what we'll do is, because Massimo's not joining us this week, we're going to pour a little out for our homie. And we're not going to let that go to waste.
I don't know if our Italian homie's going to like that champagne of beers. He likes he hates champagne. It's got to be Prosecco, and it's got to be a certain type of Prosecco. He's high maintenance. But anyways, back to the podcast. What are we talking about?
Yeah, so this week is going to be all about data, which tends to be my sort of purview and what I live in and breathe in every single day. But it's nice to have someone else to talk with about the value of it and the validation of what it means to enterprise strategy and that sort of thing. So are you down to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, fun. Just don't make it boring. Let's do it.
That's the hardest part of my job, by the way. Yeah. So, given that I work in data every single day, it's nice to have someone else to do their fair share of the talking today. But, I'm also kind of curious because you have more of a broader visibility kind of leading our team, not just in like data lake technologies or machine learning, AI or RPA processes and so on. I know I probably hit a sensitive point saying RPA there, but you have a much broader view of the overall enterprise strategy in what we're doing, where we're making investments, how we're trying to build up a lot of that mind share and everything. So, a lot of times we're trying to get ahead of the curve, and there's that strategy shift that we're trying to promote for enterprise companies to start recognizing the value of data. So with new go-to-market strategies and a lot of these product investments into largely edge applications, what do you think is actually driving a lot of the innovation strategy and growth for not so much the companies that are buying the software, but the vendors that are actually producing it?
Yeah, it's a good question. As far as the edge apps go, I think it's just companies are just looking to find some sort of value, right? So when you're thinking about, well, how can I produce more value? You don't necessarily think about your financial system or maybe not even necessarily your ERP, but how can I do something more? Not necessarily different, but how can I do something more? But specific to how we look at our investment portfolio and what we're building out, specifically with our group within N4OS, it's funny that this session is about data. So you mentioned things about even RPA, or you mentioned things about AI and ML. It actually all still revolves around data. Like, you can't get away from that. So that's why the center of gravity for our entire team is always going to be around that data integration. So when you look at things like customers starting to invest in edge technologies and that being the focus, and again, I think they're looking for that, how can I do something different? How can I increase my revenue? We end up taking a step back and we say, are you really looking for a new edge technology, or are you just looking at a way to potentially look at your data or understand your data, or what does data really mean? Or is it just analytics? And analytics has been this thing for 10 years now. Are we using it to the fullest extent? I think it's driving a new mechanism for growth for these businesses, to where they start on edge, but it's actually really about the data, don't you think?
Yeah, it might be controversial to say it this way, but maybe it's almost like, once you actually have a handle on the data, a lot of these specific edge applications are really just usability wrappers on how can I actually operationalize that data for analytics, for machine learning, for governance, risk, and compliance, and that sort of thing. I mean, there's a lot of IP unto itself, but it's driven by how can I actually use the data that we're aggregating, right?
Yeah, or maybe it's even more about the edge. The best edge apps are those that produce the greatest variety of data and the fine details around it. Like the more that you're able to capture, those are probably your best solutions because you're going to be able to do more with it. And it's not just necessarily about the lipstick on it or whatever it is. It's more about, well, how much am I actually producing out of the system that gives me more insights into my actual business, not just what I'm clicking around doing or interacting with the system or what invoice is coming in or whatever it may be. So,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. I was just reading a blog post for Stratechery. I'm not sure if you've come across that, but really, really interesting. After the Apple keynote, looking at the actual strategy that underpins Apple's trajectory, they've gone from software first and hardware second to now they're really vertically integrating from the hardware first. And so, in some ways, I think when we try and look at parallels between what that consumer technology company is doing and what customers or companies are able to do, it's really about vertically integrating that data through the entire value chain. So then that way, it's not just simply lopping on or embracing sort of a best of breed approach where you're just doing point to point integrations and you're solving for one little niche use case.
yeah, it's interesting because now I'm going to even start to confuse myself between, vertical and horizontal, because when we talk about scalability, see if you can follow this with me for a second. When we talk about companies, you say Apple starting to do this vertical integration and expansion, I would call it, which is kind of contradicting of a term, but you know what I'm saying. Our
Vertical.
strategy, yeah, our
Vertical.
strategy. There you go. Yeah.
Horizontal.
Which axis is that? But in our perspective too, when you think about that data layer that allows you to do that, now it's almost like the solutions and the technology that you use is getting more horizontal, so that you have more playground to do these different types of business models, right? So it's not just necessarily about the data, but how can I use that data in that ecosystem? So that's what I mean by horizontal expansion as well, is how do I take that data, do something with it so that I've just now expanded my plane, my horizon to do all these different areas, not just here.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying, because what you're saying is that if you're
Well, that's a
investing
relief.
in if you're investing in AI, right, and you just go out to the market and you buy an AI product, that doesn't really get you anywhere, right? Because you actually need to do something with those predictions or RPA. How do you actually tether and tie that back horizontally into your other preceding investments? Because if all you're doing is just going out and you go out to the AWS marketplace and you add to your cart, some sort of AI platform, like, yeah, it's really, really cool technology, but now you're actually having to stuck with data acquisition, data integration, data sanitization and cleansing, all the boring things. And you told me not to be boring, but it's all those boring things about data.
But it's an interesting point, and it kind of drives our strategy, which we hope is right, which is we don't want to be in the game of just constantly administering that build. So we're having these conversations. Actually, the one that we were just on earlier today, it's almost like how you have these collections of cloud services that enable the data, let's just say generically. So in the ML sense, you've got different things out there, whether it be SageMaker or it's Azure ML or you're using H2O or some service. It's not just about that. It's the data acquisition. It's, well, my data looks different in these two different domains. How do I curate that to something I can understand and reuse across the entire enterprise? How do I then train? How do I understand how to create insights? But then how does the business use it and consume it? Like it's a really tough thing to crack. And even when we started to even look at how we can use, forget the software development side of it, when we started to look at how we can use in machine learning in the Infor. So we started doing this, years ago. You never could get a straight answer on how are we going to build something. It was just like this discovery thing, and I think that's what a lot of companies are scared of or tentative of. So, for us, it's about this data ecosystem is not just about the data. It's the, as you like to say, the fabric. It's this connection points that allow you to interact, use, and understand it at the business level. That's going to make a significant impact, and how you reduce the time to market of a lot of these different insights and use it. and the more that customers are going to start to look at that as a real resource to them, the more they're going to be able to unpack those insights and be able to use this, and it not just be such a hyped up term anymore.
Yeah, so that's interesting then, because usually when, let's say, IT decision makers, CIOs, they think about data, like they're all gung ho and like super amped up about like, yeah, we want to start making decisions based off of data, or we want to start building a data first strategy. And usually what they're saying is we just want really pretty looking dashboards and analytics, right? So it kind of stops there. And that's sort of the box that most decision makers are kind of stuck in, trying to figure out how are they actually going to use this data to actually improve or transform the business, or something of that sort. So
Yeah.
how do you actually kind of, if you're putting your CIO hat on, or if you're putting on IT decision maker hat on, how do you actually try to it's a level up to the next stage or the experience, or actually start to recognize what the value of that data is beyond just simple analytics?
Yeah, well, let me take my sad Georgia fan hat off and try to be a bit more peppy. But I think it's interesting how analytics has played such a critical role, because that's just the catalyst to say, here is my data and I can understand it. This is exactly where I'm at today. And maybe even, a very, very basic trend analysis of here's what we did last quarter, here's where we're projecting. Those are all great insights, but it still puts the reliance on the decision makers to always make decisions based on how they've done it in the past, right? It's always based on historical views and my experience and my feel, and that's great. A business should never lose that. But now where it's going, the next level into that is, how can I start to use my data to question if my decision making and what I might do as my next step, if I'm trying to go from a $100 million company to a $200 million company, yeah, I can keep doing the same things, but what if there's this little nugget of truth out there that I could utilize and gain these insights to where I can change my business operations, or I can change my strategy, or I can change my product recipe that might amplify that 5 times, right? So it's reigniting everyone's going to have to be so comfortable with questioning themselves all the time, and that's really uncomfortable. But again, that's actually the advantage that having all this data gives you, and that's ultimately why I still think we're in like this analytical phase. And when I say just more basic business intelligence, because a lot of organizations are just moving towards just feed me, let me look at the data so I can start to understand it. But eventually, we really are going to get to the point in time to where it's okay for the data to question you and the way that you might make a decision about a situation. And the more comfortable we are with that, I think a lot of those organizations are going to do well. Maybe not become so commoditized, vertically change their business model, right? And move from software to hardware, or hardware to software. And I think that's exactly what obviously Apple's doing, which we need to have a hardware session here soon, because I have this obsession with the new desktop device and the Air and everything. They look awesome. I got to get my hands on them.
Have you gotten a new iPhone, by the way, yet?
No, I've still got the one from last year. I don't have a good excuse with the wife to pay for one yet. So
Yeah, I got the same problem right now.
yeah.
By the way, I see where you're going, because you've been hot on a couple of topics recently that we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks,
You
I
mean
kind of
Georgia
see where
football?
you're going. Not Georgia football.
Okay,
You're definitely
good.
not hot on that.
Well, I'm hot.
You're hot
just,
on the
just not
Philadelphia
the good.
Union,
Soccer,
the
Mike?
preeminent football of America.
Okay, all right, whatever. Move on.
Yeah. No, but you know what? I think I know where you're going with this, because it starts getting into now actually, well, dare I say, simulations. But you know what? I'll let you speak to that in a little bit. So without giving the whole thing away.
Okay.
But I kind of see where the building blocks are for maybe future development, or how people can start seeing it. But the other thing is, on every one of these podcasts, I missed last week, but every one of these podcasts, I kind of feel like we keep dovetailing back into like what's Apple and what's Google doing, what's consumer markets doing, but I feel like it's a really easy way for people to start mapping what they're actually doing in their company to the experiences that they're actually living out in the real world. So if I'm going out and swiping a credit card, for example, and or let's say actually someone else is going out and swiping my credit card, 3 states away when I just bought a coffee over at Wawa in Philadelphia just 5 minutes ago. Yeah, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, they're going to send me a text message that says, hey, this is a little peculiar. Was this you that did this? And we expect those types of experiences because we don't want to lose money. We don't have to deal with identity theft. We want, a nice, easy way to run our financial lives. And the same thing goes for, things and alerts and risks that we're looking for in the way that companies are run. And yet we don't do that same thing. We don't build out software or tools, or at least we're not even thinking about the problem in that way and saying, how can we actually use information and data that's flying all around our ecosystem to co-opt a lot of those similar ideas and actually drive new types of innovation, even if it's risk mitigation, stopping things from happening,
Yeah.
and actually using data to actually inform what should be happening in the business and what shouldn't. So I think, you're talking also a little bit about the future, but even things of how the past informs what should be happening right now, I think it's pretty interesting too. And where there's sort of a mental block for some people in trying to think about what can my data actually power.
Yeah, and it's a comfort level thing that I think we get back to too. Like everyone can always identify with these consumer experiences, like we saw with the Apple event this week. It's things that we can touch and feel and be comfortable with. But and maybe I'm curious your perspective on this, because maybe I come from a different school of thought. But it's a sensitive area. You see all this regulations being placed on personal data with GDPR and other types of things. But I think human nature nowadays is actually okay with people having access to your data, to having access to who you are and what you're doing. And maybe that's controversial, but no matter what we want to say, the consumer experiences that we ultimately love, that's how that happens. That's how that's powered. And yeah, it can make you feel, I don't know, icky or whatever based on how far that's taken. And I totally get that. But it's at a completely different speed in the enterprise. And if I try to put my metaphorical CIO hat back on too, I don't find myself similar to the consumer space. I don't personally find myself that scared of it. So I don't know if it's what's going to be the catalyst for businesses to start to be okay with not necessarily sharing their data, but understanding that so much can be done with that data to create new markets. Like, hey, now Mike's going to go buy something from a nearby store because he just bought a coffee and here's his patterns from the past, right? Well, companies can start to see benefits like that too, as long as you gain that comfortability. But it seems like, I don't want to say we're taking a step back in the consumer space, but no matter what, human nature, we're comfortable with it to a certain degree. I just think we need to get comfortable with it to a certain degree in the enterprise space too, with our business data, which is tough. I get it, but I don't know if any of that made sense or you identify or disagree with any of that. But
God, there's so much to unpack. Yeah, to your point, how many social for-profit, pay for on a monthly subscription cycle social networks are out there? Zero. It's Facebook. It's, it was MySpace, it's Facebook, it's Twitter, it's Instagram, and all it costs is your email address and your password and some demographic information. That's what you're trading in return for these types of experiences. And when you look at the market cap for these companies, it's astounding. And where are they generating that revenue from? Well, it's eyeballs, it's ad revenue, it's being able to drive people's money from their wallets into the market and actually converting that into purchases and purchasing power. So yeah, I think there's a lot of validity to that. Whenever I can, I try and pay for a service if there's a free one and there's a one that I can pay for, just because I would rather give money rather than my data at times. But I think to your point though, it's also a matter of convenience. Like, it is too easy to jump onto TikTok and to Twitter and all these other applications and platforms and then just immerse yourself in this social atmosphere that already has so much market momentum. You have millions of other users on there. Why don't you want to be a part of that? So it's really challenging as well, because you already have that inertia that's built up in those ecosystems as well. So you kind of have to agree to trade your data away. But the convenience of it, the value, the happiness, the laughter and everything like that you get in return, I think a lot of people are really comfortable with making that trade and saying, yeah, this is worth it to be part of this greater ecosystem or this platform that's made the world a lot smaller than it was 20 or 30 years ago. So I think that's pretty cool. But I think to your point, drawing a line from those types of consumer spaces, I think, yeah, you're 1,000% right. If these consumer companies have multi-billion-dollar market caps, and there's a lot of value being placed on information and data. Why aren't companies actually valuing that data the same way? Why aren't they thinking about it in the same way? So I think, yeah, to your point, well, you actually had several points over there. I think I'm missing one as
Maybe.
well, but
I don't remember anymore.
yeah,
But to bring it back to what you said earlier about the apps, or specifically edge apps, so would you argue that what you just described, so like Facebook, for instance, doesn't charge any money, but they get all this data on what you're looking at, what your likes are, all these different things, and they obviously monetize that somehow because now people can know more about you. They can advertise different ways. It's no different, in my opinion, from like these edge apps or even ERP applications. The more that I can get data about my customers from like a CRM perspective, the more data I can produce, not necessarily the functionality per se. I mean, the functionality is the first thing, of course, but the more that I can generate data beyond just what that transaction is, or maybe the edge apps that are doing things like IoT, as much information as I can get about this machine, the more insights and opportunities that's going to produce. I mean, there's so many synergies here between commercial and enterprise that maybe we're not quite articulating well yet, but it's the same story, I think. And maybe just getting into this space of customers and businesses starting to look at edge applications more so now is the first step in that direction. But they're going to realize that the ones that are producing the most amount of data, even if it's not in that domain, those are the ones that are going to be so beneficial and have long legs in this journey. So,
oh yeah, for sure. Not only that, I mean, actually, not even just the customers as well. We've actually worked on a couple of cool projects where, like in the healthcare industry, there are opportunities for our customers to actually share their data that's completely anonymized, right? So we're not exposing anything that's completely unique to one particular enterprise. But what they're doing is they're sharing purchasing data, they're sharing buying habits, and we can conglomerate this into a single space, create dashboards that say, hey, so that last time that you went out to the market to go buy, a pack of syringes, for example, this was the market price based on other hospitals that are also contributing data to this, and this is what you paid the last time. And so, do you actually have a little bit of flexibility to engage in purchasing plans with other hospital networks, or, just go back to the wholesaler and actually drive a harder negotiation to say, look, I'm overpaying by 20% here, and I have the data to prove it, that, this territory, this area, this industry, I am paying 20% markup for something that I can go elsewhere and get for far cheaper. So what's the value here? So you can drive savings that way. But I think the other one that's actually pretty cool is that I think Ray Wang said this up during one of our conferences. He had the whole toaster example. Do you remember that one?
yeah, it was good.
Yeah, yeah. You might be able to tell that story better than I can, but I think it's like sort of a high watermark of what data could actually start to do when you think about data driving arbitrage, for example. But maybe you want to take a stab at explaining the story, or you
No,
want me
I'm
to?
not going to steal it. We'll let him keep his content, but it
All right,
was
fine,
it was
fair
good.
enough.
But one thing that because I remembered that project, right? And it's not, by the way, it's not just in healthcare that we've started to look at stuff, but this concept of sharing data, of course, securely. We don't want to alarm anyone, but it's when you start to everyone's thinking about how they can use their data for their own benefits of their company. But now what you're kind of describing is there this thought that I can also be a part of increasing the industry itself, right? So if I'm sharing these sort of things, we can all reap the benefits of better pricing or better healthcare coverage or whatever it might be. But it's just an interesting perspective that it's not just about one organization itself. It could also be about how we can start to have this community aspect and realize, hey, I can push the needle for all of us as a whole and open more market opportunities. So it's not just back to your vertical integration thing. It's not just vertical integration for a particular company. It's vertical opportunities for an entire industry.
I
which
like
is
that.
it's really interesting and kind of fun to think about. So
Yeah, I mean, we're spiraling now to the point. Are we getting boring on data yet?
no, well, I enjoy it. Who knows? But
Yeah, but you know what?
I don't think we're
That's where I
boring
think
people.
nah, nah. We are missing a little bit of Massimo flair, I will say today.
Yeah,
Yeah,
our
we'll have him back next week.
I miss his English. I miss his English.
Well, a little bit of prosecco of beers from
Yeah,
Massimo.
there you go. But where do you should we talk about the future a little bit, Mike?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are. So, like you and I, we talk about stuff that we want to build and invest in, and sometimes it's more so, just daydreaming, because you don't always get the opportunity to build the things that you want, no matter what the strategy or the value of the proposition is. But I'm kind of curious. We've got a lot of inertia. I think we're working on some pretty badass things for our team between like the data lake stuff and data investments that we're making, our AI projects, and like actually more so than just building out those individual verticals or silos, I should say, actually cross pollinating the value of each one of those silos to improve the overall like market solution, which I think is really cool. And we're going to continue building and maturing that. But I'm kind of curious for the next, I don't know, let's say 5 years, right? Where do you actually think enterprise software is actually going to move or shift or pivot to? So not so much like how is data lakes or how are data platforms going to mature over the next 5 years, but actually in 5 years' time, what do you think is actually going to be a lot of the emerging technology and ways of thinking about how to actually operationalize a lot of this information that people are already generating?
Robots. That's it. No,
All
it's
right, it's a wrap.
you hinted on it earlier, and maybe we've had some kind of offline discussions on this. It's because I'm just kind of passionate about it. When we think about data, and of course that leads us into discussions of analytics and AI and how you use it. And of course, then we went into the comfort level of this data and we bounced from consumer into enterprise. But you hear all these terms about like explainable AI and reinforcement training and all these terms, right, that are in some way, shape, or form at least indirectly linked. I think there's going to be a big push and opportunity for simulation software. So to explain what I mean by that is explainable AI, of course, is a really interesting term and can be interpreted a variety of different ways, and maybe it's one for a podcast for us to discuss later. But to me, it's more about getting people comfortable with the questions. So what I mean by that is if I have the ability to go off and say, hey, what if I did make this profound change in my market? What if I did start dipping my toes into a hardware market that I provide a service for today, but now I can do some vertical expansion. I think the ability to interact with the data and test theories out within the context of my actual work. So not something completely separate, but something that's taking my business practice today that I know very well, but I can start to test out all these things. And it's almost like a test environment scenario, or a pre-production type environment to where you can do all these different things. But it's not really, you lose the touchiness of it if it's outside of production. So why not have a lot of this simulation software to say, hey, this isn't touching anything, nothing's going to blow up. I want to test out this theory and see what happens. And by the way, if I feel like it, let me run it 20 different times with slight tweaks to the scenarios. I think that's how individuals and organizations are going to become more comfortable with the power of the patterns in your data that doesn't take anything away from the human aspect of my knowledge. It's just now I'm using new tools and I'm more quickly changing my views on how we might approach different business scenarios. So this whole concept, I think we haven't done a whole lot here yet, but the hands-on simulation software for business users that just says, hey, go look at my transaction history over the last 5 years. I want to run this scenario. What if I would have done this? Or what if we do this right now? It's going to start to gain a lot of familiar nature of that interaction to where maybe people will start to change their patterns and be comfortable with it. So it's an area that I'm extremely passionate about. But again, it all comes down
I know.
to, do I have enough data? Do I have enough of the boring stuff? Well, it's not boring because it's going to allow you to do stuff like simulations, right?
So I don't know if you've seen this TV show, by the way. It's called Devs. It's on Hulu. Have you heard of it?
No.
No. So it's an insane TV show, and I don't want to get into the business on this podcast of giving away the entire
Spoilers?
scope of
Okay.
we're not going to be doing spoilers on here, but it's kind of check it out because it's interesting that what they're doing is they're building quantum computers that aggregate data about everything around them, and then they're able to start looking into past events and cause and effect, right? And they're able to start correlating and mapping all these different conditions result in this sort of outcome, and gradually they start looking into the future for that sort of thing to make predictions as well. So it's kind of like a simulation based on all these environmental constraints. So yeah, Devs is a documentary about what we're building, I guess. But I don't know, everything that you were just describing to me reminded me of that TV show, which I highly, highly recommend. If you saw Deus Ex Machina, it's the same director and everything like that. Really, really cool TV show. But I think it's very, very similar to what you're saying, which is you have enough information about how things have happened in the past that you can start to simulate how things should be predicted. Well, I shouldn't say predicted, but what are the best options and what ifs to make a decision as you continue to expand your business, or if you're a brick and mortar shop or something like that.
Yeah.
Which plot of land do I want to buy in order to drive the highest revenue per square foot of retail space, right?
Yeah.
Usually companies have to hire Nielsen or Kantar, and they go through and do market analysis for 6 months to figure out, here's your option. This is where you want to open up your next brick and mortar shop. But from what you're saying, it sounds like a lot of this is going to be commoditized into software, where that's where you kind of want to see it going in the next 5 years.
Yeah, ideally. And I think it was on when we brought Nunzio on. We got to bring him back on to add some good looking vibe to this show. But I think he said something along the lines of the evolving workforce, right? And what is that going to look like? And I can't really put my finger on it, but I'm really passionate about creators. I feel like we always want so much of that in our group specifically, and I think that's going to be a priority for HR departments in every single business out there. Is they're going to want and need and value people that just want to create and expand and question things. And the market's going to need something like simulation software to be able to facilitate that in a way that businesses don't freak out about, right? Because there is so much value in the ability to just create and do things different, but do so in a safe way. And that's where I think data's leading us. So maybe we'll start looking in this simulation space here soon.
Wink, wink.
Yeah, we'll see. But Mike, hey man, I enjoyed it. I always enjoy when we get to do these. But for the audience, go check us out. Be sure to subscribe on all forums, whether it be Spotify or Apple Podcast or specifically YouTube. Leave us some comments. Let us know what you think. If you want us to talk about any other topics outside of sports here in Georgia, be glad to talk about those. But until next time, Mike, appreciate it, man.
Yeah, good chatting, Rick. I'll talk to you later. Take it easy, man. Cheer up.